This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Social Security expert Nancy Altman argues that the program is not only solvent, but ought to be expanded. In this holiday season, religious philosopher James Skillen reflects on the connection between faith and politics in America. And law professor William Forbath says the Constitution is not only a legal charter, but a political and economic document as well. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Nancy Altman is an expert on Social Security, and she argues in her new book that not only is the system solvent, it can and should be expanded. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Nancy Altman is one of the country's leading experts on Social Security. She previously was a top staff member of the Greenspan Commission that saved the system in the early 1980s and is co-author, along with Eric Kingson, of a new book called Social Security Works: Why Social Security Isn't Going Broke and How Expanding It Will Help Us All. Nancy Altman, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're quite welcome, and it's a pleasure. The title of your book suggests our first two questions. Why isn't Social Security going broke, and how will expanding it help us all?
Thank you so much for asking that question. Social Security is the most universal, efficient, secure, and fair source of retirement income that the country has. It works extremely well. It's entered in 2015 is its 80th anniversary. It is very popular and works, as I say, extremely well. The only problem is that its benefits are very low by virtually any standard. So the way to improve it is to expand its benefits for all of us. Now, there's been a lot of propaganda around this program and a lot of misinformation that the program is going broke and it's not going to be there for young people and so forth. That is just not true. Social Security is actually one of its ingenious parts is that it's very conservatively and prudently managed, so that every year it forecasts out 75 years, 3/4 of a century, which of course is longer than the program's only been around 80 years, so it's almost the entire length of the program going forward. The reason it does that is to reassure Americans that there will always be the funds there to pay the money. Now, when you project out that far, you sometimes are going to show surpluses, sometimes deficits. We should be looking at it closely. There is a long-range deficit, manageable in size, that should be corrected. But it really cannot go broke because it is financed through the contributions of current workers, and as long as there are current workers, there will be plenty of money coming in.
Mm-hmm. Now, you argue that expanding Social Security will not add to the deficit. So, for the math challenged among us, explain how that would work.
Social Security, as I say, is very conservatively managed, so that it, by law, can only pay benefits if it has enough income to cover the costs, and it has no borrowing authority. It is totally self-financing. It's got its dedicated contributions from employers and employees, which is its primary source of revenue, and it's got two other sources of income. But it, by definition, cannot deficit spend, so it cannot add to the deficit. Now, if we expand it, all the proposals, there are probably half a dozen proposals now before Congress, and in our book we not only list them all, we have our own proposal. All of them pay for Social Security and indeed pay for the expansions and indeed pay for that modest shortfall that I mentioned just in response to your last question. So it would put Social Security on would expand benefits and make sure that all those benefits could be paid well into the future without adding a penny to the deficit.
And yet we hear so much other news to the contrary, which is interesting, and we can talk more about that in a moment. We're speaking with Nancy Altman, one of the country's leading experts on Social Security and co-author, along with Eric Kingston, of a new book called Social Security Works: Why Social Security Isn't Going Broke and How Expanding It Will Help Us All. So, Nancy, over the last 80 years, Democrats have owned the Social Security issue politically, and Republicans have been on the defensive. Do you see anything changing as a result of this year's elections?
Again, an excellent question, and I would actually modify it slightly because it historically, as you say, has been a winning issue for the Democrats, and for good reason. The Democrats have been the ones who created the program. It was created in 1935 as part of the New Deal, and have overseen all the expansions, adding survivor benefits, adding disability benefits, ensuring cost of living adjustments, adding Medicare, which can be seen as part of the Social Security system. But something happened, and I've been working at this long enough that I've seen the change. I've written an earlier book called The Battle for Social Security. And every generation there have been those who've not liked Social Security. President Eisenhower called them a small splinter group. They tended to be quite outside the mainstream, and they said it was socialism. They said that it was not something government should do, and so forth, which is perfectly appropriate. It's just not what most Americans believed. Starting in the late 1970s, something changed. You don't hear those arguments anymore that it's socialism. What you hear is, oh, it won't be there in the future. And somehow this Wall Street pushed argument, which is false, has gotten many Democrats to stop speaking aggressively about Social Security, and few of them, a number or more and more beginning to, but very few talking about expanding it, which is what we should do. So it historically has been a winning issue for the Democrats, but clever Republicans have kind of cowed Democrats by saying it's going bankrupt and it's going broke, and talking about expanding it is irresponsible. And Democrats have bought into that, and we saw that in the midterm election. We had many progressive issues that passed, maximum hour and so forth, but Democrats as a group got attacked from the left on Social Security because some of them had, being the responsible statesmen they thought they were being, bought into the so-called grand bargain, which had cuts to Social Security in it. It is a mistake. It's a program that needs to be expanded, not cut. And all politicians, and certainly Democrats who've been the champions of this program, should wake up and start advocating what the American people want.
That sounds almost like the beginnings of a splinter within the party on this issue. And this is a pretty big issue. I mean, do you see that happening amongst the Democrats?
Well, if the Democrats are smart, they'll join rather than splinter.
Yeah, sure. Well, absolutely.
But you are exactly right that there is a kind of battle over the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. The New Deal issues, the various things, the idea of a living wage, the idea that after a lifetime of work, people should be able to retire in dignity, the idea that health care should be a right, not a privilege of the wealthy few. Those are issues that have been traditionally Democratic issues, and that the American people side with the Democrats on. And those are issues that Democrats should proudly argue for. We've got Elizabeth Warren carrying that flag. Bernie Sanders does it. Sherrod Brown, a number of the Progressive Caucus in the House. Some members do, but unfortunately, there are many Democrats who've bought the third way, which I jokingly say is no way at all. It's a kind of Republican light. And if your choice is between, as Harry Truman said, a genuine Republican and a pretend Republican, people will vote for the genuine Republican. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a long way of saying, if Democrats don't wake up from the idea that cutting these very vital programs is the wrong way to go, then there may be a splintering of the party, because more and more Democrats are seeing that as the right way to go.
And here's something I find interesting. Democratic Congressman John Larson has introduced a bill that would let the Social Security Trust Fund invest in the stock market. How does that differ from Republican moves that we've seen in the past to privatize the program?
It differs light years from Republican privatizing. And that is, and this is something that's a little complicated for people to understand, but it's a very important distinction. Social Security is a pension plan. It provides, and you can think of it as wage insurance also, it provides your replacement for your wages if you become disabled, if you die leaving young workers, young children rather, or if you are fortunate and grow old and have worked for a lifetime. It, like other pension plans, has a trust fund and an accumulated balance. The current accumulation, according to the most recent data, is $2.8 trillion. Now, because Congress from the beginning has wanted this money carefully guarded for the American people, it's been invested in the safest investment on earth, which is Treasury bonds backed by the U.S. government. But private pensions tend to diversify their portfolios, and that's what financial advisors always say. You want to diversify to get both make it safe but get a higher rate. And equities earn more than bonds. So a diversified trust fund is what Representative Larson is calling for, so that some of that $2.8 trillion would be invested in equities. The difference between the privatizing the program, the fundamental structure of Social Security, where it's guaranteed benefits, where it's pooled risk, where it is insurance, not savings, is what is all kept intact with Representative Larson. The privatizing the program is switching it to savings and making the risk on the individual. So, hey, here's some money, go invest it in the stock market, and good luck. If you wind up going broke, I guess you're going to have to work for the rest of your life. That is not what Representative Larson's proposal is about. It's confusing because it sounds similar, but it actually is all about simply getting a higher rate of return for the people's money.
Mm-hmm. With safety as a part of it. I mean, there's a lot more safety with Congressman Larson's. Okay. Now, and again, folks, we're speaking with Nancy Altman, and co-author, along with Eric Kingston, of a new book called Social Security Works, Why Social Security Isn't Going Broke and How Expanding It Will Help Us All. A lot of us, Nancy, don't understand the opposition to a program that is arguably the most successful example of government lifting an entire class of people, the elderly, out of poverty. Can you explain Republican thinking or just any anti-thinking to this?
And yes, and let me be very clear about this, because it's really not a Republican-Democratic issue so much as it's the American people and the elites. Our polling shows, and it's not just our polling, this is an issue that has been polled since the 1930s. It's polled by the Social Security Administration, it's polled by conservative groups, it's polled by liberal groups. All the polling comes out the same, and that is overwhelmingly the American people support this program. You know, it's like 80%, and it's maybe 90% of Democrats and 75% of Republicans, but it's still overwhelming among and by independents as well. There is a small group, as I say, that some of it's for ideological reasons, that they hate government and they don't want, and this is a government program that works. Some of it is Wall Street, that if the money weren't going through Social Security, people who wanted to retire would have to do something and they'd have to save on their own, and that would be big fees for Wall Street. So there are a lot of special interests. And what they've done is bamboozled the rest of us by convincing many, many young people especially, but really all Americans, that it's a great program, but it won't be there in the future. And that's just nonsense. We are the wealthiest country in the world. We are much wealthier today than we were in 1935 when the program was created. And there is no question, and our benefits are low by international standards. So there's no question, not only can we afford Social Security, we can afford a much more expanded Social Security.
Now, as an advocate for strengthening Social Security, what are some of your specific ideas about how to do just that?
Well, the first is exactly, I appreciate having this interview, because part of it is education, that the American people have enormous support for this program, but they've been led to believe that it won't be there for them. And that is, number one, we have to explain the truth to them, and that's what our book, we have a whole chapter in our book about charges and the truth, and you can just go through it. It's everyone you've ever heard about the program, I think, or we tried to think of everyone we'd ever heard. So that's step number one. Step number two is to be very determined with our elected officials and get them not just to say they want to save the program or protect the program or preserve the program or they love the program, but to really put in specifics. Are they for expanding it, or would they put up with any cuts to it? And then what we would do, Social Security is a wonderful vehicle. The benefits that it provides for retirement, disability, and survivors should be increased. But in addition, caregivers should be given credit, people who take time out for the workforce to care for others, and it's such an important, valuable to all of us. There should be paid family leave that could be part of a Social Security package. There used to be benefits for surviving children who wanted to go to college, and those were eliminated. We should restore those. So we should be thinking in broad policy terms. Social Security is a solution. It's a solution to a upcoming retirement income crisis. It's a solution to the plight of many seniors who are not doing well today. It is a solution to caregivers and families that are squeezed today and with stagnant wages, and it is a solution to our perilous upward redistribution of wealth that is not good for our society.
Okay. Nancy Altman, expert on Social Security. Her new book, she's co-author along with Eric Kingson, Social Security Works, Why Social Security Isn't Going Broke and How Expanding It Will Help Us All. A good way to get educated on a very, very important topic. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Christian philosopher James Skillen reflects on the link between politics and faith, both activities striving to make sense of what it means to be a human being. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
It's Cyber Monday. Get out there and buy stuff. But you don't actually have to go anywhere, for this gimmicky shop, shop, shop day lures us to consume without leaving home or even getting out of bed. Concocted by Amazon, the online marketing monopolist, Cyber Monday is a knockoff of Black Friday. Just another ploy by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos to siphon sales from real stores. Seems innocent, but behind Amazon's online convenience and discounted prices is a predatory business model based on exploitation of workers, bullying of suppliers, dodging of taxes, and use of crude anti-competitive force against America's Main Street businesses. A clue into Amazon's ethics came when Bezos instructed his staff to get ever cheaper prices from small business suppliers by stalking them, quote, the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle. Jeff Crandall, who owns Old Town Bike Shop in Colorado Springs, is one who's under attack. He offers fair prices, provides good jobs, pays rent and taxes, lives in and supports the community. But he's noticed that more and more shoppers come in to try out bikes and get advice, yet not buy anything. Instead, their smartphones scan the barcode of the bike they want, then they go online to purchase it from Amazon cheaper than Crandall's wholesale price. You see, the cheetah is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year beast that can sell that bike at a loss, then make up the loss on sales of the thousands of other products it peddles. This is Jim Hightower saying this amounts to corporate murder of small business. And yes, it's illegal. But Amazon is doing it every day in practically every community. So on this Cyber Monday, let's pledge to buy from local businesses that support our communities. For information, go to American Independent Business Alliance at www.amiba.net.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Not many people these days have a high opinion of politics, but religious philosopher James Skillen says there's a strong link in American history between faith and the higher principles of governing. And we say hello to Dr. James Skillen, a Christian political philosopher who served as president of the Center for Public Justice from 1981 to 2009. In that capacity, he focused on public policy, civic participation, and institutions of governance. And he is the author of a new book, The Good of Politics. Dr. James Skillen, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for inviting me in.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Let's start with the title of your book. What good is there in politics, or is your title aspirational rather than descriptive?
Well, the primary aim of the book is not simply to sort out and describe what are the good things there compared to the things that aren't so good. You could spend a lot of time talking up the merits of constitutional rule of law, holding governments accountable, civic participation, the end of slavery, et cetera, which are good and certainly ought to be held on to and conserved, and as well as talk about the many injustices that continue to persist. But what I'm really trying to get at is address the rather large audience, not only religious in the United States, and not only Christian particularly, but the broad constituency of Americans who really aren't sure about the legitimacy of government at its most radical conservative end, that it has almost no value except to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic, or those who, even if they recognize that there's some need for government, they're suspicious of what it'll do. They don't want the government to raise their taxes because it's going to misuse them. And for the most part, they see their own lives, the real meaning of living as human beings, as not political. That's a side necessity, needing a policeman now and then. Real life is family life and business and so on. And I'm trying to make the case that political life, the building of political communities, the having of sound government and sound civic life is a crucial part of human identity. It's something that we should be participating in as part of the realization of human life and doing justice to our neighbors, as much as we would pursue education, science and the arts, family life, as typically what it means to be a human being. So it's a big reach from what I think is general American political life. And even among those who would be most desirous of having government do good things, you could say at the liberal end of the American spectrum, I think for the most part it still has to be justified in terms of an outcome of a deed. The achievements for the greater the population, or that we can make people more free or more equal by having a government approach to something, rather than an argument that really says we are made for political life and should nurture and be happy participating in political life. So that's the different argument that I'm making.
Mm-hmm. Now, you make reference in your book to two exoduses in American history. What were they, and how do they relate to the way we govern ourselves today?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if this is a unique insight to me, but it really hit me in the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years and grew until I finally worked it out. And I think it helps to explain an awful lot of American politics today. The dominant Exodus story that most whites would be familiar with, if not experientially from school, is the story of the Puritans, pilgrims leaving the darkness of the Egypt behind with the oppressive king and Pharaoh, and going across the Red Sea, the North Atlantic, to the new land, and entering this promised land. And it's characterized by freedom for enterprise, freedom for persons, very deep suspicion of central government, so that on up into the founding, the last thing the founders wanted was a strong central government. They certainly didn't want a king. And the whole Constitution is really based on states being the primary political communities. The federal government was a means to the freedom of states and individuals. So the idea of a national community wasn't even there. It was the United States, plural, of America, not a single entity, which of course it's become by now. But the same biblical kind of language, very familiar to the Puritans and the most early Americans, was taken up, first of all, in songs and so forth by the slaves in America, brought over. That's what they learned into, and many of the African-American spirituals and others go back to this song, which is fundamentally that of the Exodus story. That God, waiting for God to deliver them and praying for his deliverance. But now in this case, you see how the story shifts. Who's the Pharaoh? Well, he's not the king over King George in England. He's the landowner right here in America. He's the slave owner. And what will liberation take? Well, there it goes back to the themes of the Declaration. If all people are created equal, then what has to happen is not just to get the slaves out of the slaves out of the slave system, but the country has to be transformed, because whites believe it's a system that exists. So they're going to have a new view of even what America is. So it's more of a transformation of the country internally compared to leaving the darkness of Egypt behind, as in the first story. And of course, for the second story to succeed, finally through Civil War, but then eventually the Civil Rights Movement, it required a strong federal government, strong court action, and federal action that even went into the forced opening of schools and stuff in the South, Brown versus Board of Education changing disallowing segregated schools. So from that point of view, the story is counter at almost every point from the white Anglo-Saxon story. And I think my own view is that the deepest thing that's happening, no matter what the issue in politics today, whether it's taxation, whether it's keeping America strong to defeat threats from the outside, a kind of a stronger military view, whether it's something else, that what you deep underneath is, on the one hand, this desire of many who are more conservative to recover the original America, the America that God gave to the enterprising, largely white, free persons without a strong central government. And on the other hand, the aspiration for rights, to have rights protection, equal participation, that goes off in its direction of now almost any identity group wants to claim to be something like the African American slaves who need liberated from whatever it is that's keeping them out of equal treatment. So whatever the issue, if you go to the depths of what's after, so I think we're at a battle of civil religions. Who has the right to define the true faith of America, which will be its true identity, going forward with rights, which may mean getting rid of even further privatizing religion of the old kind, or on the one hand, trying to recover an older era.
We're speaking with Dr. James Skillen, author of a new book, The Good of Politics. The so-called Christian right has had much success on the political battleground for some time. Does the Christian left have a place as well? I mean, after all, the civil rights movement was nothing if not religion-based.
Well, I think that's, again, what's interesting is however secularized, meaning antipathetic to religion or simply wanted it privatized so it can not interfere with life, however it is, the country is still loaded with the influence of what it was as what I would call a civil religious republic. The idea of the country as a chosen people, an exceptional nation, whether thought of as chosen by God or not. I think the whole enterprise, not so much Christian or something else, is a form of civil religion. Now, within that framework, those who are more rightist, some of them not very religious, but certainly among many Christians, they associate their Christian faith with a very conservative right side view of political life. So the Christian right has had influence. But many, certainly many African Americans, you think of Martin Luther King's speech and the whole civil rights movement grounded in the black church, but people like Ron Sider and Jim Wallace and others who are very much left from the point of view of what is right, though by no means radicals, see themselves as evangelical Christians. It just doesn't get enough attention, in part, I think, because the religious right is stronger here than the left. And also, I think, because the left-leaning political life people in the United States are often suspicious of religious arguments because they don't want to get drugged into that. So you see some of that ambivalence in people like Obama and others who are certainly, you'd see them in the broad scope as from the political left and certainly the Christian left. But that is, it's not trumpeted, and I think it goes back to the two Exodus stories that I just mentioned as the drama that goes on between them.
Is there any explanation why so many politicians embrace God and a Christian way of life, yet wind up committing the most egregious sins of the flesh? I mean, is it simply because these people are all hypocrites, or perhaps the life in politics leads to those particular transgressions? Yeah,
well, from my point of view, and I would hope that it's the view of many, many Christians, we're all sinners, and the claim, whether it's political or otherwise, many pastors and others who either put themselves in the place of God or are seen to be the ones who speak for God. Politically, it might be God is on my side, vote for me, not that other guy over there who will lead us astray. The very nature of the language suggests being in special touch with God, or because there's a Christian, they already possess some rite of passage. And I think it's just foul, and obviously when it breaks down, it shows hypocrisy. Unfortunately, hypocrisy has been a dominant theme of most religions, and certainly Christianity throughout its history. Depending on how one interprets what the norms should be, anyone who breaks them and is also professing the faith. Now, if you go deeply enough into Israel, Old Testament, from a Christian point of view, the New Testament, there's never any basis for the politician or the religious leader to be claiming to have the authority to speak from God. The prophets rail against the kings for continuing to be pretending that they are righteous when in fact they're not, and on up through history. So I think there's nothing new about it. It's just that in our society where the whole idea of an established church is out, the idea that any faith should be established, it sneaks in from those who really still see this republic as a religious enterprise, with those who want to claim that they represent the old tradition, the tradition of faith in God of a kind that should make them apt for the job. I'm just critical of it largely because I think what ought to going into the campaigning as well as into office holding is how good a steward one is of the office that they hold. They ought to be arguing for what the office should do and the policies they're going to work for and their idea of what justice demands for the day. And if they would stick to that, there'd be plenty of time and freedom for them to answer the question that explains, well, where are you coming from? Are you a Marxist? Are you a libertarian or Christian? And they can explain where they're coming from, but it's in the due modesty that says, look, I'm just a human being fulfilling human responsibilities. And here's what I think political life should be about.
Yeah. Now, we've only had one non-Protestant president of the United States. Can you imagine the day when America might have a Jewish, Muslim, or some other non-Christian in the White House?
Yes, I can imagine it. I mean, it's still the question of majority character, and I think we got where the battles were over policy and people who can make a good case for what a just polity should be, that anybody who can make the best arguments for interpreting where we are in our time and how to advance the public interest and our relationships with other countries in the world to do justice, overcome the injustices at home. Anybody who can make that argument, if they're Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, if that's crucial, could be elected. I think the prejudice is just that even if the prejudice is in favor of an American white person who looks like they're religious, and of course many are suspicious of Obama precisely because he isn't white, not just because they think he's a socialist. If the suspicions against the ignorance of what Islam is, certainly Muslims who would be happy in the United States with its system of government, and other people, probably puts that a long way off, but I don't think it's inconceivable.
Okay. Dr. James Skillen is a Christian political philosopher and author of a new book, The Good of Politics. Dr. Skillen, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org, and hopefully we can do this again with you soon.
Well, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it. Look forward to another time.
Our pleasure. Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. When we think of constitutional originalism, we tend to think of the Scalia wing of the Supreme Court. But law professor William Forbath tells us that the first originalists were liberals. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, William Forbath is Associate Dean for Research and holds the Lloyd M. Benson Chair in Law at the University of Texas. Among the nation's leading legal and constitutional historians, he is co-author, along with University of Texas law professor Joseph Fishkin, of a recent well-received article called The Anti-Oligarchy Constitution. Professor William Forbath, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here with us today. Now, what is your thesis regarding income inequality and the meaning of the Constitution?
Well, income inequality, from our point of view, right, is one part of a broader problem of economic inequality and how it bears on the promise of equal citizenship and equal rights under the Constitution. Right? So some measure of income inequality isn't, however it may be troubling from a moral or ethical point of view, isn't as such an issue for even this pretty robust conception of material and social equality under the Constitution. Where income inequality becomes a constitutional problem is where it does one of two kinds of troubling things, where great wealth, and that is inequality that runs to the mass of wealth at the top, enables an elite to become entrenched and use its wealth not just to have more of the material things of life, but also exert a great deal more political power than ordinary citizens. And income inequality at the bottom is a constitutional worry to the extent that it reduces people to a condition where at the very bottom they're in such desperate want that they can't really exercise any of the ordinary rights and privileges of being a full member of the community, of participating in civic life in any fashion. And when they're reduced to a circumstance where they don't enjoy the equal respect and dignity of full members of the community. So there is income inequality, as I say, is kind of a touchstone of these broader constitutional concerns at both ends.
Now, you argue that the Constitution should not be seen only as a document about which powers each branch of government should have, but has historically served as a political and economic guide as well. So does that mean the courts should be more expansive in their rulings, or do we need more amendments?
part of what Joey and I argue is that for most of our history, a lot of the most important constitutional arguments, both about economic life and other matters, but we're talking about economic life, were arguments that unfolded in arenas outside the courts. There was certainly a great deal of argument about our political economy, about the economic power of different actors in the courts, but no less so it was outside the courts. And much of the work depended in the first instance on lawmakers making good on certain kinds of constitutional commitments about equality and equal opportunity. Whether this outlook demands broader or narrower rulings from the courts is awfully hard to say at that level of abstraction, I'm afraid.
Now, we're speaking with William Forbath, Associate Dean for Research, Lloyd Benson Chair in Law at the University of Texas. He's co-author, along with University of Texas law professor Joseph Fishkin, of an article called The Anti-Oligarchy Constitution. Isn't the Constitution purposely ambiguous on many questions? Otherwise, it would just be like a book of laws, would it not?
It's purposely general and pitched not in every respect. So the rule that each state has two senators, right, or that elections to the Senate are every 6 years and to the House are every 2 years, are pretty unambiguous. So there are provisions that are rule-like and fairly clear, and provisions that are principles or standards that are extremely vague and general. And so, like equal protection or even the freedom of speech is a promise in the Constitution that seems designed for people to argue about, even though they agree that what they're arguing about is the Constitution, for generations to change from one to the next. So very general principles invite that kind of both lively disagreement and change over time.
Now, doesn't the originalism that conservatives and a majority of the Supreme Court subscribe to really apply only to political issues that the right is interested in?
So it's interesting. First of all, I'm not sure I'd agree the majority of the court is originalist, but that's neither here nor there. Many of the justices on both sides of the liberal-conservative divide will use originalist arguments in one context or another. Originalism actually, funny enough, really became a sort of understood and recognized form of constitutional argument and reasoning in the hands of liberals back in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. The liberal justices, or some of them, were in favor of bringing more of the rights embodied in the Bill of Rights to bear on state government as well as national government. And it was they who said, the framers of the 14th Amendment intended to incorporate the Bill of Rights into the 14th Amendment and apply against the states, mostly in the service of poor criminal defendants. Not the originalists. I mean, not the framers, but in the eyes of these liberal originalists. So I'm somewhat of the view that originalism doesn't have a necessary political valence in terms of contemporary politics. And as you're implying, there's a sense in which some of the work that Joey Fishkin and I do in this piece is a kind of left liberal originalism itself.
It just seems that they do seem to hunt and peck when it suits them best in reference to the Constitution. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Hunt and peck in terms of when they invoke history and when they put history to one side. In some measure, I think that's true. In some measure, I think it's in the nature of our constitutional tradition and the way we do constitutional law and constitutional argument, that there are many different kinds of constitutional argument, legitimate kinds of constitutional argument. So the only thing that's irksome about a judge or a lawyer who employs originalism or the framers' intention, sometimes not, other times, is if she also, like Scalia in many ways, right, insists that it's the only legitimate form of argument, as he sometimes does. So it's only when you claim that abiding by whatever the framers of some provision expected to happen is the only way to legitimately interpret the Constitution that it seems contradictory or inconsistent or hypocritical to then ignore the history of some provision that points in a direction you don't want to go.
Now, the Tea Party rails against the elites and worships the Founding Fathers, but weren't they, particularly Jefferson, Adams, and Madison, themselves elitists, wealthy and well-educated in Enlightenment values?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, so were they elitists? In some ways, absolutely. On the other hand, in the context of their day, certainly a Jefferson and Madison, right, in the 1800s at least, were about mobilizing ordinary citizens against what was becoming an entrenched elite of Federalists, Washington, Hamilton, Adams. So in their day, at least two of those gentlemen were pretty darn egalitarian, at least as between, sort of the ordinary ranks of white guys and the very wealthy and elite ranks of white guys. They were the ones who led a lot of the struggles to open a space for more active participation on the part of ordinary folks. I would think that the Tea Party's problems with the framers don't go to the fact that the framers were by and large well-heeled, so much as that the framers, the gentlemen who gathered in Philadelphia, had in mind a great expansion of national government power and a building up of the central government in its taxing capacity, in its capacity to regulate economic life, and its capacity generally to exert much greater authority over both individuals and local government, that the Tea Party may find themselves kind of gnashing their teeth about the framers as they really were.
We're speaking with William Forbath, Associate Dean for Research, Lloyd Benson Chair in Law at the University of Texas. Professor, are capitalism and constitutional principles fully compatible?
There are many different kinds of capitalism, and sort of unbridled corporate capitalism with a government whose policies are shaped by a corporate elite is inconsistent with constitutionalism as my co-author and I understand it. But a capitalism that combines markets and private ordering on the one hand with public regulation and public ordering on the other is, I don't think, inconsistent with constitutionalism.
Do you think the Constitution, or does the Constitution require or simply permit an activist government?
I think some of both. I think that in some domains, like the ones we've talked about, it does require a measure of active government, and in other domains it leaves open how actively, how much public ordering of some sphere of life is demanded. So It's a fair question, and it's not conventional wisdom to say that the Constitution demands various kinds of affirmative government action. But when you think about it, even the most traditional understandings of what the Constitution requires, like due process of law, is a demand for a whole elaborate, complicated, expensive governmental machinery. And if you fold into that the idea that in a modern society, the Constitution makes, right, or we can legitimately make claims on the Constitution about the quality of our education and the extent to which effort, right, and work is rewarded with a decent livelihood, as Joey and I argue, well then, yeah, it demands a certain amount of active government.
And it allows you to do so. So I guess the answer is both, right?
Too.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, William Forbath, Associate Dean for Research, Lloyd Benson Chair in Law at the University of Texas. The article we've been discussing today, The Anti-Oligarchy Constitution, which he co-authored along with University of Texas law professor Joseph Fishkin. Professor Forbath, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. It was a pleasure, and we hope to do it with you again soon.
You're welcome.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Nancy Altman, James Skillen, and William Forbath. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.